Okay, we have the database set up now. Let's see if we can get it to serve some data using an API that we can consume with React. And so I've got a lot of windows open, it's driving me nuts. I'm going to close all those. And let's go into specifically into our weather forecast controller, because the controller is the thing that's going to serve up the data, right? And so I'm not going to delete this one because I want to use it as a reference. But what I'm going to do is create a separate controller. So add controller. And it's saying, do you want to do an MVC controller? I don't. We're not doing MVC. But it does say API as an option. And so, and even if it isn't, even if you can't find API or whatever, it's just text. And so you can type in the same thing that's in there. So I'm going to put an empty API controller in, add that. And it says, what do you want to call it? And I'm going to call this my Marriott food controller. All right, so I add that into my controllers folder, and it already has done some things for me. It's set up a route, API / and then the name of the controller. It's said that this is going to be a controller. It grabs the Marriott food controller, which inherits from the controller base. Okay, that's all great. Now let's look at, again, just kind of modeling off of this to try and figure out what we're doing in this world, this new world of APIs. It looks like we create something called a get method that's returning an IEnumerable of type weather forecast. In this case, weather forecast is the name of the class. And so I'm going to just start by trying to do something similar. So there's HTTP get, name is get weather forecast. Let's see if I can build something similar to that in my Marriott food controller. So I'm going to put in here a method public, and it was an IEnumerable, which, by the way, is just like a type of list. It's something that's really easy to iterate through. So exposes the enumerator, which supports a simple iteration over a collection of a specific type. This makes it really easy for us. We haven't used, I don't think, IEnumerables yet, but we have used DB sets and lists, and it's along the same lines, just an object that's really easy for us to enumerate as we're moving through JSON objects, okay? So public IEnumerable of type, what type of information is it? Well, it's going to be a Marriott food, right? So Marriott food. And it says, okay, what, back to looking over here, that's what we're returning. And then we have a get method. So I'm going to put in here, close that, and then say get, opening, closing parenthesis, opening brace, closing brace. Okay, so this is the method that's being set up. And then just again, to follow along with that pattern, I'm going to model after this HTTP get that says get weather forecast. I'll say above this HTTP get, and then, was it equals? I can't remember. Name equals, and then get Marriott food. Okay, so I've set up kind of a method that looks like it. I'm going to return something out of this method. I don't really know what exactly yet. But this is where we have to go load up the data, just like we've done before. And so how do we do that? How do we access the database? Well, notice it's doing the same thing, similar to what we've done in the past with having a constructor that brings in this case, a logger, and then sets the scope of that to be the class level. So let's do the same thing. So I'll create a controller, public Marriott food controller, okay, and then in parentheses I'll indicate what type of information it is that I want passed in. Well, I want an instance of the database in .NET, and so I'll say what we want is a food DB context that I'll just call temp, and then I'm going to create a private variable here, a private object, an instance of food DB context that I'll just refer to as food context. And then here in my controller, I will set food context equal to temp. So whatever's passed in, whose life is between these two braces, I will instead set it into this FoodDB context, which lives between these two braces, meaning all these different methods can see it and have access to it. Okay, perfect. So this error, by the way, is telling me that it's not returning anything. Let's make it return something. So I can go in, create a little var called food list, and I can set that equal to, and it's guessing for me very appropriately, food context. Of course, there's not a table called Marriott Foods in there, right? What's the table name in our context file? It's just foods. And so, bad guess there, but thank you for trying to help. So we want foods.toList, and then we can return the food list out of this method. All right? Makes sense? So just like we've done before, very similar to what we've done before. And by the way, could you just take this and this logic and drop it right in the return statement and get rid of this? Yes, absolutely. We can go in and return directly the code, but it's not great programming practices to be doing stuff in a return statement. Typically in a return statement, we just want to hand it stuff. So we don't want to be doing calculations. We don't want to be pulling data, whatnot. Typically, this is speaking generally in terms of good programming practice. And so instead, we drop it into a var. The var is IEnumerable of Marriott Food is what it'll end up being based on the data that's in there. And so if we want to specify the type, we can specify the type. But typically we just say, hey, throw it in a var, and that's the name of it. So, all right, so let's see if this actually does anything, right? In theory, this should pull up some data. So I run this. And it shows we have our weather forecast from before, but it also shows this API for Get Marriott Food. And so I can click on this. It shows what it looks like. It does still have this try it out button. I can click on that. This is all Swagger, by the way. When we did that little import for Swagger, it helps us to see the information before we actually access it. And then I can say execute here. And holy smokes, it's got my data. Right? How do I access it up here? So I come in and I say Marriott Food, enter. Oh, bummer. Well, if I go look and see, well, what is telling me how to get to this thing? I have this get, the name of the class is Marriott Food, whatnot, and then I go examine this route. And the route says the way to get there is API / and then the name of the controller. So if I go back to my running app and I instead say /API / Marriott Food, enter, all of a sudden I have my data in this beautiful little JSON format. Okay. Now, if I didn't like that route, I can go in and modify this. So I can say instead, I don't want it to be the API. I want it to just be the name of the controller. Or I want it to be, whatever, Spencer / the controller. You can go in and identify the route, but if I just leave it without that API on there and run again, then when I go out to the server and type in something, I can type in the name of that controller, Marriott Food, and it will go grab the data from the database and serve it up in a way, an IEnumerable, right? In a way that we can read it in a JSON format, just like we've done in our other React apps. There's this old show, The A-Team, right? There was a new version of it that wasn't that great, but an old show called The A-Team. And Hannibal in there would always say, I love it when a plan comes together, right? And so that's the idea here. I love it when a plan comes together. We now have a JSON object, and we know what to do with JSON objects in React. And so that's what we're going to do next. Spencer out.